There are 616 days until the 2024 midterm elections. Welcome to today's episode of the Mary Trump Show with the Nerd Avengers. Hi, Dean. Hi, Brian.
Hey guys.
Um, I want to start. I should stop saying this because it happens to be true every friggin' week these days. But because there's so much going on, we have a lot to cover. But I do want to start because I don't want this stuff going under the radar with the success that not as yet 2024 candidate for Republican presidential nominee, not Ron DeSantis, and his increasingly broad and successful attempts to turn the Sunshine State into a hellscape, basically, of ignorance, bigotry, and white supremacy. Right? I mean, what Ron DeSantis seems to be concerned about and engineering is the right for straight white evangelicals to be free from the existence of everybody else, and above all, to protect those very very fragile white supremacist people from learning white history. Okay, so uh, there's more going on there. Of course, he's trying to make it easier to bring defamation suits against the media. He's, as we know, tried to make it easier to arrest people for voter fraud, which like practically never happens. What's uppermost in my mind today, though, is Meatball's full-on onslaught of all education, but most recently higher education. Excising from curricula teaching that has anything to do, even tangentially, with wokeness, inclusivity, intersectionality, critical race theory, diversity, even though those terms are never clearly defined in the legislation, which is very threatening, but also I think intentionally vague, because that way we're going to get a lot of self-censorship going on in the classroom. To make matters worse, DeSantis also plans to put the hiring of faculty in the hands of this freaks me out, in the hands of campus governing boards, which the governor ultimately controls. So Deans, there's all sorts of bad going on, and that's just like scratching the surface. And we only have you for a little bit of time, so I wanted to start with you and what you think. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, but off the top of my head, an educator called this just blatant, outright fascism.
Look, we are. I'm so alarmed. I'm wearing my Captain America shirt today as part of Dirty Adventure.
That's
Captain
a good
Muslim
idea.
America. I call it Captain Muslim America. But anyway, this is look. If people look at what Viktor Orban did in Hungary, who they love, the Republicans love him. He's an autocrat within a democratic shell in a way, because it really is. They have elections. It's really hard to win elections against them because they control the media. But Viktor Orban and gutted like was a liberal institution there and took control of it the same way Ron DeSantis has done in Florida. They banned gender studies in Hungary. Same thing they're doing right here. They're copying it. And it's also deeper. I mean, you look at in China and Russia, they mandate patriotic educations. And there's a reason why, so they can control people. They teach them a history that helps their leaders stay in power. So that's part of it. But it is so, it is, when you look at some of the details, like, for example, they only want you to teach American history consistent with the Declaration of Independence. Ron DeSantis has given up on talking about the Constitution, despite the fact in 2011 he wrote a book about the Constitution and the founders, and how that book, I'm trying to write an article about it, will be banned under his own anti-woke law, because he talks about racism a lot in the book. The Declaration of Independence, they want to talk about it because it says all people are created equal, all men are created equal. The Constitution has a fugitive slave clause in it. The Constitution has a three-fifths compromise. You have to talk about slavery. You have to talk about that the Constitution enshrined and defended slavery. They don't even want that. They are literally erasing a document, and they want you to teach history consistent with this aspirational, beautiful document, Declaration of Independence, which really is a laundry list of complaints by the colonists. When you read beyond the first few lines, the rest is like, and he's bad with taxes, and we got to pay a lot for tea, and this is BS. It's really like very specific after that. I'm like, that's what you want to teach, whining? So, I mean, it was justified whining, don't get me wrong, but that's the victimhood I think they want to teach there. So it is worrisome. It's an attack on academic freedom. They want to control what you can read, what you can say, who you can be. Next, they're coming for abortion. It's a 15-week abortion ban. They want to go down to 6 weeks. After that, they're coming for the media. They've turned this state, just a supermajority Republican control of the legislature, into a petri dish. It is DeSantis stand, as I've been talking about for a while. And it's where freedom goes to die. Not wokeness, it's where freedom goes to die, and ultimately democracy as well.
Yeah, and of course, because this is what they do. On the other side, they just try to make us insane. DeSantis's new book is coming out today. Don't buy it. It's called The Courage to Be Free. So how's that for a kick in the teeth, Danielle?
You know, what was really funny, yesterday I had the wonderful pleasure and honor to be at the White House celebration for Black History Month. And both, you know, President Biden and Vice President Harris spoke very unapologetically about history and about the importance of inclusivity, and that they are very aware of this erasure that is going on and how dangerous, and they use the word dangerous, this erasure was. And people in the audience were obviously, you know, clapping and cheering because, you know, the constant refrain that you were hearing, and if you watch any clips of Benjamin Crump, the attorney at the NAACP Awards, where he received the Social Justice Award, you know, he's like, you cannot erase us. Like this goes into something that is so deep. And I love the fact, Mary, that you're talking about this, because, you know, folks initially kind of shrug their shoulders and they're like, oh, it's an AP Black history class. Like, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. It's like, you know, you just kind of shrug your way to having absolutely no freedom and living inside of a fascist state. And what DeSantis and what the other copycat white Republican governors are trying to do is exactly enshrine into our consciousness, into our curriculum, this idea of white superiority and white belovedness. I saw somebody who was Black but a Republican, which to me is the worst kind of Republican, are people of color who are also Republicans, or from any marginalized group that are Republicans, say, you know, slavery wasn't that bad. Like, it was a viral tweet that happened at the beginning of this week that says, why is it that when we learned about slavery, like, we're not learning about, you know, those that like took care of the people they owned? I said, I'm sorry, what the fuck? Right? Yeah. Like, what are you even talking? Like,
sorry, what about all the good slaveholders?
Yeah, you are a descendant of those slaves that they could not kill. That's why when you see Black people walking around, recognize that you're the descendants of the slaves that they could not kill, right? And so to say, to even have this very dangerous statement floating around in social media about benevolent slaveholders, you owned a human fucking being, right? That did not have bodily autonomy, that could not decide when to sleep, when to eat, when to use the bathroom, you know, when to breathe, when to exist. Like, what are you talking about? But this is the kind of bullshit that DeSantis and others want to become the norm in America. The only good thing is that as of right now, he can't block out the internet, that Florida isn't China, right? That people have access beyond the dated textbooks that are in front of them to understand the world around them. But come soon, if he becomes President DeSantis, you want to talk about the crackdown on the internet? You want to talk about the crackdown on the media? You want to talk about us doing this show from shared cells? Like, that's the kind of world that he wants us to be living in. And it isn't something that folks should be shrugging off because you don't have kids that are in Florida or in the education system, because this is what they want to do nationwide.
Yeah, I'm not letting this go. This is I think this is along with taking away the bodily autonomy of half of Americans. This is the most important thing. This is and I, in some regards, it's more important because it's never been resolved. We pretend that it has been, and we therefore leave open opportunities for people like DeSantis to come sliding in and essentially put in place a system that's never been properly dismantled, because Jen Rubin. We keep so many white people in this country ignorant. My mother actually grew up, or she spent the second half of her childhood in Fort Lauderdale, and the schools were terrible back then. But Florida had gotten to a place where, at least in some cases, their higher education system, public university system, had made great strides, and in some cases were creating programs that the rest of the country was looking to. And DeSantis is going to dismantle all of that seemingly unopposed. So you just wrote a great piece about this. So can you give us your take on what is going on, why it's being allowed to happen, and what the end results are going to be?
Just to pick up on something my esteemed colleague just mentioned, it was not so long ago that exact portrayal of slavery was in the Virginia textbooks.
Right.
They spoke in these terms. This is not the Dark Ages. This is not the 19th century. This is the 1950s. So this, in fact, was the mindset of much of white America until relatively recent. This is not ancient history. This is the mindset that they propounded. You know, there are two aspects to what DeSantis and these other people are doing. One is the deliberate spread of white supremacist thinking, that people of color have no history, have no value, that they are incidental to the American story, that when you talk about them, you're talking about the bad parts of America. That is pernicious, evil, un-American. But he is also doing something else, which is making Florida students, Florida residents, dumb. He is intentionally making them stupid. And I did a piece today looking at both the K through 12 schools and the schools of higher education. There is no state that does what Florida does, which is take moderately performing fourth graders and turn them into terribly performing eighth graders. This has now been documented. The longer they stay in those schools, the dumber they get, the less competent they get. And you have to say, well, is this a bug or is this a feature of what he is doing? Has he so destroyed the public school system, so antagonized decent teachers, that he is intentionally dumbing down an entire generation of people? And I think the answer is yes, that this is not a bug. This is a feature. And when you look at higher education in Florida, as you say, for a while it was doing pretty well. Well, beginning before DeSantis, but now accelerating, there are fewer and fewer people going to Florida higher education institutions. I wonder why. Could it be that the state is no longer uniformly white and that people of color do not feel welcome on these campuses, do not feel like this is a place that's going to value them as human beings? And the guy who has two Ivy League degrees, one from Yale, one from Harvard, last year gave a speech in which he was saying it's a good thing that so many people are not going to college. Because after all, you know, people who go to college actually read books, people who go to college live longer, people who go to college make greater incomes, people who go to college live longer. Who wants that? We would rather have low-functioning, passive, poor people who we can distract with a lot of racial nonsense. And that's basically what's going on here. And the myth that somehow he's a good governor, except for all this other stuff that he's doing, is absolute claptrap. Yeah. If you look at his record, the record of other red state governors, it is atrocious. Shorter lifespans, more poverty, more child poverty, more homicides. And if they were ever evaluated on the merits, people would be horrified, which is in large part why they do all this other stuff. Because while they're busy distracting people, their level of governance is atrociously low. And you know what? Nothing has changed in the South since the 19th century. This is exactly what they've always done, which is try to convince poor, less educated whites that at least they're superior to African Americans, and therefore it doesn't matter that their lives are crappy. And that mentality has never changed, and it's still going on. And DeSantis wants to do for America what he's done for Florida. What could be better?
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. And Jen, to your point about how recent some of the egregious rhetoric around slavery is. In 1996, I was 31 years old. Do the arithmetic. An Alabama state senator argued that this is a quote, slavery was a family institution and civilizing influence that gave enslaved people education and the Christian religion for which those converted Black Southerners are most grateful today. So worth the torture, murder, and rape of millions and millions of people. I mean, it's that kind of despicable. You know what he said is despicable. The fact that, as far as I could tell, there were absolutely no repercussions because it was Alabama. And, there probably wouldn't have been in the United States Senate either from Republicans. So, Norm, I want to one thing that sort of drives me crazy about state politics. One, because I don't really understand it that well, but we see this in Wisconsin. The system gets rigged. Republicans get a little bit of control, decide not to play by the rules, decides they don't want democracy anymore. So we end up Wisconsin being a 50-50 state, but Republicans always will control the state houses. They have a very good chance often of getting a supermajority. In Florida, why is it so easy for DeSantis to run roughshod over any kind of democratic process?
So let's reflect a little bit on DeSantis. One part of this is DeSantis overruled the state legislature last year, which had come up with a redistricting plan that was actually fairly reasonable. Partly, of course, after Florida had a referendum that was supposed to outlaw partisan gerrymandering. What DeSantis did was outrageous and unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court let him get away with it. So let's look at another area where there is a big problem. I want to come back to DeSantis in a minute, but I also, thinking about the court, reflect more broadly on our discussion. Last week, I was in Georgia and Alabama doing a civil rights tour. We went to Selma, to Montgomery, to Birmingham, and to Atlanta. And in Selma, we met with a person named Joanne Blanton, who had, as a child, been in the Bloody Sunday March, still lives in Selma, born and raised there. Selma is a disaster area. They had a tornado that has just devastated it, but also because of white flight, they have no tax base, and it's just a terrible, poor place. But you think about when you're there and you go to these museums and memorials, and you think about what people bled and died for to get a Voting Rights Act. And then you look at where we are now, and you look at a Supreme Court that has reveled in eviscerating it. John Roberts basically dancing on the graves of the people who died to bring voting rights. A decision beyond Shelby County, the Brnovich decision, where Sam Alito, joined by the other 5 on the right, basically said, I don't care what the law says, I'm going to rewrite it to take away what remained of the Voting Rights Act. And you realize, as Jen said, that these are the battles we've been seeing in this country and fighting in this country for centuries. You also realize when you look at it that we were on a path towards something better in the aftermath of the Civil War. Federal troops went down. We had a renaissance of Black leadership moving into House and Senate and state legislatures. And then we had an election that was reminiscent of what we have seen in our lifetimes in 2000 and again in 2016, that basically sent us down to the dark side again. In 1876, where the compromise was, we'll take the federal troops out, and then the Klan and the racists and the former slaveholders moved in to create what was in effect slavery with indentured servitude, and to take away all the rights that hundreds of thousands of people had fought and died for. It's a tragedy that is not ending, and now it's coming back. The only sort of tiny sliver of light was Scott Adams, the repulsive Scott Adams, comes out with this racist rant, and at least you see a bunch of newspapers and others who say, no, we can't take that anymore. And then, of course, you see Elon Musk saying, hey, he's got a point there.
Yeah.
So it's one step forward, two steps back. Now, just a comment on Florida, and I think it's broader. Higher education is being destroyed in Florida, and these universities, some of which have been just terrific places, they're going to lose their best faculty. And they're going to have a black mark in the country. People who graduate from places like Florida State, the University of Florida, New College, are going to be unable to get the best jobs because people are going to see that they don't have good education. But let's not forget that DeSantis started by dismantling public education at every level.
Right.
Now what we see in Florida is, first, they've removed all the qualifications for teachers so that they can put some of their right-wingers who have no ability to teach, but who can indoctrinate in place. Now we're seeing an attempt to drive out the good teachers. You know, in Manatee County, which is a prosperous county on the West Coast, Sarasota, where basically teachers are being told, if you give your students a book that at some subsequent point we decide they shouldn't have, you can be prosecuted and sent to jail for it. Who is going to stay as a teacher under those circumstances? This is an attempt to destroy public education at all levels and replace it with private indoctrination. And, you know, seeing an op-ed in the New York Times that said, hey, we liberals shouldn't be as frightened of DeSantis. He's not as bad as Trump or as bad as you think. It's just cringeworthy to see that this guy's going to get left off the hook. And then you see, well, maybe Glenn Youngkin, because he's more affable, would be better. He's no different than DeSantis, except that he wears fleece and has a smile.
Yeah, I call him
a smile.
I call him a little Nazi in a sweater vest, Glenn Youngkin.
Fleece fascist was my name.
Oh, I like that, fleece fascist. There's so much here, and Brian, I know I haven't gotten you yet, but Dean has to leave in a minute, so I just want to check when.
Let Brian. I don't mind. I will cede my time to the gentleman from various publications.
Okay, but I'm not going to let you. So
okay,
there you
I
go.
have to talk. Sorry, I will talk to Brian.
I'll live.
Because I want to have a conversation about the media, but I want to kind of, and obviously Brian can talk about other things as well, but I just want to not close the loop, but just build on a couple of things that everybody else has said. That, you know, and it's not just that people who go to Florida universities won't be able to get a job. People who go to K through 12 schools in Florida won't be able to get into a university outside of Florida. And what's happening is they're creating a permanent underclass. And this is what I mean. Yes, you could say that any student in Florida is at risk of will not get a good education. But students of color, students in the LGBTQ plus community will grow up being taught that they are less than, that their lives don't matter as much, that they are not equal, that learning about their history is shameful, and that what's the truth is that American history is about the superiority of white people. And that to me is one of the most dangerous things about all of this. And DeSantis is a danger no matter what. I mean, I personally don't think he's viable on the national stage, but if he got a nomination, I don't care. I'm not taking that risk. We will fight tooth and nail against him because we've been wrong before, haven't we? But the truth of the matter, even if he doesn't get into national office, he will continue down this road, and Florida will be a test case for Texas and Alabama and Mississippi and on and on and on, wherever they feel like they can get away with it. So, Dean, I just want to get your last thoughts, because it's so many insightful things have been said, and you know, I think a lot of times when we're just sort of helpless spectators watching this stuff from afar, but it feels like we need to come up with some solutions here.
Well, the one good thing, we saw students do a massive walkout in Florida. Yeah. Students are taking their own power. They're enfranchising themselves, and hopefully you'll see more of that. You know, there are things in Florida. It's the little things that stick with me. I saw a story about a teacher who's in a same-sex marriage, who was told because of Don't Say Gay bill that she will be allowed, the school said she can bring a picture of her spouse to school and put it on the desk, but if a student asks about it, she can't say that's my spouse. And I'm like, how do you live that life? You're recloseting people, and that's what Ron DeSantis wants. Teacher got fired. There's an article about it, you probably saw it, for taking the pictures of the empty bookcases, and is fired for doing that. It is a third-degree felony in Florida, up to 5 years in prison for bringing books that are not on the Ron DeSantis approved list. This is the United States of America in 2023. This is an honest conversation we're having. This is where we are. This is not hyperbolic. This is the nation we live in today. And if Ron DeSantis can expand that beyond Florida, he gladly will. And a lot of Republican base, I had a guy call me last night, you should live in a free state of Florida. And they believe this. Like his book is titled, not ironically, I'm sarcastic, I guess, The Courage to Be Free is the name of his new book. I guess it's sarcastic. It's like the Onion book of politics, where he's banning books, he's banning Black history, he's banning saying gay, they banned abortion, they punish corporations.
Dean, it's always the dig. It's always the see. So I can get away with anything.
So to your point,
the grift.
Little painful stories are the ones that stick with me. How does a teacher say, that's not my loved one, that's just a special friend I have or something?
It's my buddy.
How did teacher have to literally put cardboard up over the books because they're afraid to go to prison for bringing books? And the big thing is just, this is real. This is not 1984, the sequel. This is what we're living through right now. And we have to, like you're saying, Mary, and that Norm, that article in the New York Times, who approved that piece of garbage? Ron DeSantis is not that bad. That's unbelievable. And you're going to try to gaslight us and you're on our side. He is that bad. He's more dangerous than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is the gravest threat that we've lived through. Ron DeSantis is worse because he's younger, for nothing else.
Smarter.
He's in his 40s, right?
Yeah.
He'll be with us for a long time. Donald Trump, I'm not sure how long it lasts. So,
well, yeah, exactly. And the big difference is that Ron DeSantis is an ideologue, and Donald will just do whatever is better for him, and he'll do whatever gets him more money or whatever. I'm not saying DeSantis actually believes in this stuff, but he does have an organized ideology around what he's doing. I mean, it's not, this is a project. This is an organized project. And the New York Times, they also published an op-ed about how we should have a contested VP rate. I mean, what do the New York Times, I think, and DMK, they're single-handedly trying to destroy democracy, because the stuff that's getting published there, like, sometimes even the headlines alone just want to make my head explode. But anyway, sorry. You and Brian look so much alike. Brian,
he's much more handsome than I am. Stop it.
It's a good thing watching. We're both of Arab heritage. That's why.
You're more seasoned, Brian.
We're Middle Eastern. What do you want?
That's right. Close enough.
All Middle Eastern people look alike anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Just ask Wash and Kurt.
Yeah.
So he's also going after the media, and this is, of course, all part of the same project, because Brian, just as the vagueness of these ridiculous pronouncements about what can't be taught will lead to self-censorship in the classroom, so will these attacks on the media and making it easier to defame reporters lead to underreporting or incomplete reporting, or who knows, it's
crappy reporting.
Well, I was going to say or reporting that just normalizes all of it, which is one of the most dangerous things, as you know better than anybody, we've been dealing with. So, Brian, it feels like it's all of a piece here.
Well, first of all, I want to say I love the Johnny Cash guitar in your background, and you're going to have to play that for us at some point in time. Either that or the Fender acoustic that you have back there. I'd love to hear either one of them. They look great.
I better start practicing.
just to quickly go through a couple of things. What we miss in this equation, and we're looking at DeSantis as a huckster and a charlatan, and he is. But he's taking advantage of a fear that many, and I don't relate to the fear because I've only had it drilled into me through my in-laws who live on a farm in mid-Missouri over the years. Their big fear is that and here it goes, they're afraid that at the end of the day, they're going to end up being treated as blacks were when they were slaves. They're afraid of quid pro quo. So what drives them is this fear, and it's an irrational fear, but it's played into by people like Donald Trump and now DeSantis. And what they're doing is saying, yes, this will happen to you. Black people are out to get you, which is why you have a comic saying, run away from black people. And I'm going, if that's the case, my family, when I go to a family reunion, is pretty blended. There's a lot of brown faces, black faces, and white people. And so what am I going to do? Run away from, a third of my family? Horse crap. It's that playing into the fear that generates the numbers and generates the support, because they don't explain anything rationally to people. They just give them their irrational fear, feed it back to them. And of course they want to keep you ignorant. That's what George Carlin said. They want you just smart enough to operate the machinery. That plays into them. This is all about their ability to grab and grasp onto power. And, I remember I was a young kid. Muhammad Ali was one of my idols. I was lucky enough to meet him, and as a 9-year-old, get into the ring with him and get scared to death of him because I was in, boxing class. And what he said was he was here for, at the end, he said, what I've grown to understand is I'm here for all humanity. Black rights that he fought for were human rights for everyone. And making those fearful white people understand that it's not about taking anything away from you, but allowing everyone to have the same is where you have to go in order to, and you won't reach everyone. You never will. But it's DeSantis who is going after the fear factor in Trump. And regarding those two, if you want to, you're upset with him, Mary. I am too. But I love what Joe Biden said in his last, and I wish he had more of them, press conferences, when he said he was looking so forward to seeing Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis beat each other up for several months.
Wait,
and
who am I upset with? There
leftovers.
are so many people that I could potentially be upset with. Who am I upset with?
well, with DeSantis and with Trump. And
does that have to be upset? That's one way of putting it.
Yeah, that's
why at first I thought you meant Joe Biden, because upset with Ron DeSantis is maybe the understatement of, and Donald, the understatement of several millennia. But anyway, go ahead.
And the as far as the press goes, I put a letter out to the president and to members of Congress. It's an open letter, and I'd love people to look at it and sign on to it. It's on Facebook, justaskthequestion.com. It's on my Twitter account and whatever else social media I'm on, asking what we need in this country is to put together a commission to look at how to heal the media. We are all anxious to see better, and it's from the right and the left. This is a bipartisan issue. We stink, folks. There's no other way of saying it. We stink. And the reason why we stink is because there's just a handful of media outlets that are owned by, most media outlets are owned by a handful of companies. So we've said that many times here. It's got to change. We are now at the point, we still have the means to change it, but we've got the window is closing to do so. And Ron DeSantis would slam it shut. If we don't have media reform, if we don't break up media monopolies, if we don't encourage a diverse ownership, if we don't get more minorities involved in owning companies, if we don't have more reporters in the field, we're doomed. Everyone knows, if there's one witness to a scene, you have to take their word for it, right? If you've got 30 witnesses on the scene, you get to decide, what was the consensus of what happened. That's why you need more eyes on politics and more eyes on every aspect of the news. And we're not getting that. We're getting fewer. Twice the number of people on the planet is on the day I was born. Half the number of reporters. Do the math. That's where we've got to go with the media. So I urge everyone to sign on, take a look at that letter and forward it to your congressman and to the president. Repeat it early and often and read my thoughts there, because after 50 years in this business, I can tell you, and I've done everything from being a paper boy to being an executive of a newspaper chain. This has to stop. It has to stop now.
Yeah, of course it does. And I think, though, Danielle, it's going to require, and you don't need to speak to this, I'm just I'm just saying, as a way to segue to you, that it's going to require some creativity. I don't think there's any getting back to the old model. And you can make an argument that that's not necessarily the best way to go, but something that where we are right now is dangerous and scary when you have the fourth estate complicit in ending democracy. But anyway, Danielle, before you get to your point, I want you to remind everybody about your reboot and where we can find you.
Oh, the relaunch of the
yes, that's the word I was looking
for. So Woke AF is going. My daily show is going to be relaunched on iHeartRadio in the middle of March. So, folks, you'll be able to find it where you get all of your podcasts. And I'm really super excited to bring in these friends and other folks back onto Woke AF for like longer form conversations than I get to have on Democracy-ish or on the New Abnormal. So very excited about that. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped the gun. I thought it was March 1st. I thought
no, and so did I. But when you work with behemoth companies, that's kind of so,
yeah.
Surprise. But to the points that have been made, I think that one of the reasons, people often ask me, how did I get into doing the work that I do? And I took a really windy path because education for me has always been the thread by which I have taken on different jobs in different spaces and places. And, I was a teacher. I was a classroom teacher. I worked on education policy on the Hill. I, then decided, to pick up a microphone to find a different kind of classroom to educate people in a different way. And I think that what is really unfortunate about where journalism is now, and I don't refer to myself as a journalist. I did not go to school for journalism. I'm an opinionator, and I'm very clear about that fact. That where journalism is that it is like most things in a capitalistic society. It is driven by money and it is driven by clicks. And I think that, to that point, people have to be really discerning about where you're getting your information from. One of the beauties before it became a really toxic environment with social media and platforms like Twitter and platforms like Facebook is that there was a democratization that was happening in our media where you did not have to rely on the gatekeepers liking your look or liking your sound in order to give you, a column or to give you a hit or to become an anchor on a news show. Right, that you could, I did a panel earlier this week at VirtuousCon, and one of the questions that were asked was about this kind of contention between social media, eyes on the ground reporters, right, and mainstream media. And I said, I want us to, there are lots of things to be, to have conversations about, but let us understand back in 2014, when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson by police officers, the only reason why that became mainstream headline news was because of the on the ground folks that were there live tweeting the situation as it was unfolding. There was not a news camera there until it went viral on Twitter. And similarly, ahead of that time, Black Lives Matter. You would have not had the eyeballs on the trial of George Zimmerman if it had not been for the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So there is this incredibly wild west where we are right now, where traditional media has become beholden to their shareholders and their CEOs. And then you have those that are on the ground finding interesting ways, whether it be through TikTok or through Twitter or podcasting or in all of these different forms to try and disseminate information the best way they can. But much like with all things, and I'll say this about my own experience when I was in high school in a predominantly white school out east on Long Island in New York, is that,
Oh, where? I'm sorry, because I grew up in Queens and I lived in Rockville Center for a very long time.
Oh, okay. So I grew up and I went to a Sachem School District. If you're familiar with the Long Island Expressway, said 61.
Way out east.
Yeah, very, very far. Very, very far east. But my experience growing up in a majority white area has always been that it has been my responsibility to educate myself in the way that I wanted to be educated. I remember being in high school and making the case in front of the school board, because I've always been who I am now, and saying that I wanted to propose a curriculum on Black history, right? And I was told, and I was doing this is back when, you would get on the phone and they would pick up the phone to listen to student advocates and what have you. The head of the board was just like, I think that our curriculum is sufficient, our history curriculum. And I said, well, as a Black student, one of the handful in this school, I'm going to tell you, it's woefully not sufficient, right? Like it is a few pages in a 700-page book, and all I learned about was the fact that we were slaves, Martin Luther King died, and then everything was okay. So that's it. And he was just like, the response was, oh, I didn't realize you were Black, right? Because the assumption was that because I was advocating for
as opposed to
that he assumed that I was white because I was on the phone. So
okay. Now I got you. I thought you were saying that you're in the room with them. They're going,
you don't sound Black.
You don't sound Black.
I don't sound Black. And
now I'm with you.
Right. And so the point being that you're talking about, close to 30 years ago that I'm trying to push for an advanced curriculum and a richer curriculum in my school, because I could see how I was trying with my book reports and essays to educate my white teachers on like the Black experience. And I'm saying, wouldn't it be great if everyone was able to have a rich experience, right? So this is not, what DeSantis is doing is not new. It's just more deceitful and incredibly dangerous, because it is fascist, because it's not just about not teaching, it's denying access to those books and those curriculums and those teachers. That's what makes this even more reprehensible than just having a 700-page textbook that came out of Texas that only has 10 pages about the Black experience in this, 100-page book.
Okay, Brian, real quick. Okay.
Real quick. In its response to what Norm and what you just said is, look, there was a time, not even 30 years ago, but back in the 70s. And I think at this point in time, I'm going to put my pitch in for Jimmy Carter being one of the few presidents I could stomach in my lifetime. A kind and gentle man who, as a Christian, said, my Christianity determines that I should do what I can for everyone as long as I can with whatever I can. That man, there was a brief time, and Norm, it wasn't just after the Civil War, but it was in the 1970s when I thought for just a brief moment that we were going to be a better country. We had lost both Kennedys. We had lost Martin Luther King. We had lost Malcolm X. We had gone through the Vietnam War. We had gone through riots. We had gone through Richard Nixon. It was a hell that this country went through. The Tet Offensive, the Vietnam War, all of it. Here comes Jimmy Carter. And at one point in time, I remember there was a show called One Day at a Time, and it's, Valerie Bertinelli was a teen, and there's a thing where the mother is dating a Black guy, and they're dating each other, and they're going, it feels a little uncomfortable that we're doing this, but they looked at their children and they said, maybe our children will have better. And we ended up with worse, because what we ended up at the end of that brief window where we all were wearing the same ugly ass wide ties, wearing the same goddamn shirts, listen to the same music with those horrible bell bottom pants, and even white guys had afros. When at the end of all of that, we ended up with Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan set the table for where we are today. Never forget it. There was a moment in the 70s where I thought we would have a chance, and we lost it in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan.
But Brian, we should take comfort from another reality. This Supreme Court will do away with not just women's bodily autonomy, but they will go after LGBTQ people.
Yes.
Not just marriage, but sodomy itself. but thanks to Clarence Thomas, Loving v. Virginia is safe.
Yeah. Well, and to your
Well,
point, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
I bet he's going to grandfather it.
Yeah.
Seriously. As long as you're in a mixed race couple before, it's fine. But from now on, it's not okay.
No.
I mean, we are in fact, Norm, I'm glad you brought up the Supreme Court, because the next two issues I want to touch on briefly are sort of broadly or tangentially related to the conversation we're having now. As we know, the Supreme Court is listening to arguments in the case of whether or not President Biden had the authority to forgive student loans, because forgiving student loans would just be evil. Where early signs indicate that both Clarence Thomas and John Roberts are skeptical that Biden has such authority. And then in media news, we know now that everybody, including Rupert Murdoch, knew that the big lie was a total lie. And they knew it was a terrible thing to promote, but they decided to keep promoting it anyway. And in addition to that, Rupert Murdoch was passing along information to Jared Kushner, of all despicable, incompetent, unqualified people, about Joe Biden's campaign ads. So, I mean, it feels like this. It feels, Norm, like this. There are so many battles being fought on so many different fronts, and it's hard to know. What is the sticking point going to be? Like, where? How do we dig our heels in and gain traction in countering all of this? I know this is a conversation for a much longer conversation for a different time, vis-a-vis the Supreme Court and what to do about that. But just there's so much to fight against. It's hard to know where to marshal our resources sometimes, I guess.
We're not in a good place.
That's me every day. It's just like
be hopeful.
It's hard to write articles if that's your vocabulary, right? Sorry, Norm, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's there were many decades where I was the optimist in the group. I can't be an optimist anymore. It's very hard to look at the trajectory of the country and realize, and getting back to the press and to Brian's compelling letter and comments, our mainstream media don't recognize the threats that we face, or are too frightened or too arrogant to do anything about it. And I think there is a lot of arrogance here that goes with it. Yeah. We don't have to explain. We can't complain. I looked at the Times, and the Times is still the paper of record. They still have some tremendous things. But reading the Vanity Fair piece on the controversy over, the letter that hundreds of Times contributors sent in, objecting to the paper's coverage of trans issues and people, where their top editor says it's not right for our people to criticize our paper. That's why they got rid of the public editor, right? Yep. They had a public editor who would try to hold them to account when they made mistakes. Now it is back to, we're not going to even examine the mistakes that we've made. We're not going to look at where we are going wrong, when the country is at stake. And it's just hard to feel optimism. And when I look at where the Republican Party is at all levels, and you look at Rupert Murdoch's deposition, and you realize that it's not just Murdoch and Fox afraid of their own viewers and voters. It's Republicans who know better, who do nothing to step up or fight back against this slide to autocracy and Orbanism and fascism. And if you lose your moral core, if you have no ability to say this is shameful, how can you feel optimistic? I wish I were in a better place.
Yeah, it might shock some people to know this, but I was an extraordinarily optimistic person until about 7 years ago. And it's really, it feels like violence being done against one when that gets chipped away at. I mean, I'm not cynical yet, but and I think that's part of their larger project too.
Yes.
Just to take that away from us. And Brian, I know you have something to say, but I want to go to Jen, because it's demoralizing when you, after, as all of the trauma we've all been through collectively and separately over the last 7 years, to have the inner strength and the wherewithal to keep fighting for things that we already had or should have, fighting fights that should have been resolved a long time ago. And one thing, it's like, I've said this many times, it's a very difficult time to be a human being with empathy. And it's also really tough to pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you don't have any bootstraps anymore, Jen.
I've always thought that the most depressing job now must be to be one of those 3 normal, decent justices on the Supreme Court, and to be confronted every day with such unbelievable intellectual dishonesty from people who know they're spinning nonsense, from people who know they're bastardizing history. And you sit there writing away and pointing out that they are frauds. You lose every single time because the fix is in, because those 6 will hang together for forever. Now, if you want a depressing job, be that justice. So when I start feeling sorry for myself, I said, it could be worse. You could be a Lady Kagan.
Or Justice Jackson. I mean, never having had
a job. Or she's so sure she wants to be there, but I want her there. So
yeah, same.
I think part of what totalitarian regimes do is they flood the zone. They give you this sense of paralysis, of inevitability, so that there are just too many things, so you don't do anything. So you feel like you're overwhelmed. And I try desperately to wake up every day and find those little green shoots or those little rays of light that you can amplify and hopefully spread. Because it's not just the promise of the green shoot, but it's that, to take the metaphor, that when the shoots come up, enough of them come up, the pavement begins to crack beneath it, that you get enough exposure to truth, to decency, to honesty, and somehow that becomes contagious in a sense. It is, however, very, very hard to remain optimistic. If we're talking about arrogance, and that is, I think, a lot of what I think is wrong. I call it a lack of empathy, but the flip side is arrogance. The New York Times never did a self-analysis of the 2016 campaign and what they did to Hillary Clinton. If you're not going to do that, if you're not going to come to terms with how badly you misled voters, how badly you served democracy, why should we be surprised if they don't take these much more minimal steps in terms of examining kind of the garbage that they put off, often through the guise of putting it in a opinion from somebody outside? They don't have to have those opinions. They can find different opinions that are evocative of the truth, that serve their viewers and their readers' interests better, but they don't. So I think there is tremendous arrogance in institutions, and there is a complete failure to grasp that the rules of civility, the rules of decorum are used against people who are fighting for economic justice. I will acknowledge I was embarrassed by an in-house editorial from the Washington Post in which they took issue with people protesting on the street outside of Justice Kavanaugh's home. Mm-hmm. That, I thought, particularly for a newspaper, was completely
egregious,
unacceptable.
Yep.
what is a little disturbance exercising one's First Amendment rights compared to the daily injustices that are being perpetrated. They should be so insulated. They don't even have to hear a little rumble out on the street. Not that people want to, but I don't have a protection for people coming, up to our street.
Nope.
Nor do you, Mary, nor does anyone else here. So the notion that somehow we have to protect these rules of decorum that inevitably insulate people in power from accountability is hugely misplaced and hugely short-sighted. And it comes from a place of not understanding what it is to be without power, what it is to be without access to the media, to the public's attention. And so I think the notion of breaking up the media is right, but it also depends who's going to break it up with. If we're simply going to recreate little modules of that same mentality, we're really not going to be any better off. And your comment about having a multiplicity of voices and viewpoints, I do not think a lot of what gets published or doesn't get published would be the case if we didn't have an overwhelmingly white, college-educated, upper middle class group of people running virtually every media outlet. It used to be, Norma remembers this, I remember this, you didn't need a college degree. You could be a good working stiff and go get a job at a newspaper. And that brought a certain realism, a certain level of humanity and connectedness with the people that you were covering. And
I'm older than you. I remember that. I'm one of them.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
A beat reporter, like a beat cop.
Yeah. And you actually got to know the community and you knew what it meant to be, struggling for a paycheck, and you knew what it meant to have people who were disrespectful towards you because of your background and your socioeconomic status. So I think we have so many problems on so many fronts. And I sometimes wonder, could people just sit down and read a book now and then? I mean, really, just read a book. Turn off the social media, turn off the claptrap you're getting from Fox News. Read a book, a real book, not a book by one of the people on Fox News, but like a real book about something. And anything, even a fictional book, would teach you something about human imagination, about empathy, about something, instead of just imbibing this claptrap that gets you more and more certain of your own position. So I do get discouraged. I get hugely discouraged. And so I force myself to go out to places like Wisconsin in February and look at the good news.
No matter how ill-advised.
No matter how ill-advised and how icy the sidewalks were. So, yes. So you really have to put in a lot of effort to do this. And let's face it, the other problem with the media and with a lot of these institutions, elected officials, they're lazy. They are unbelievably lazy. Unless something is served up on a little platter, already pre-digested, fully masticated, they are not going to do anything with it. And
I fire those people.
You just ask George Santos how lazy.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that it?
Yeah,
one newspaper.
Brian, last word, because
I'll say I'm not fearful. Yeah, I feel like and I do have hope, and I say this because I don't know if you remember the first Batman, but when Jack Nicholson reads a newspaper and it says "Winged Freak takes over."
Wait
Gotham
a minute,
City.
The first Batman.
Yeah,
was the TV Batman.
Okay, the first Batman with Michael Keaton. You're correct.
Okay,
the first Batman was 1989.
Oh my God!
And he says, Winged Freak. He reads the headline: "Winged Freak takes over Gotham City," and Jack Nicholson says, "Wait till they get a load of me." Screw the authoritarians. I'm not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. I know but in fight or flight, baby, I'm fighting. Screw these people to the wall. I don't give a good goddamn about them. At the end of the day, what needs to be taken, what needs to be done, needs to be done. And what needs to be done with the press will be done. I'll give my last breath to do it. So I'm not fearful. I'm not hopeless. I do have hope. I do have I am optimistic because there are people like you, Mary, and you guys all here, the Nerd Avengers, because you people are standing up. when we stand up together. I saw a great little email from Donald Trump, who said the silent majority isn't so silent. Donald, you're absolutely right, and you're not in the majority. Go screw yourself. We're
Exactly.
the majority. We're not going anywhere. Bite me.
Just one thing to keep in mind, that people often forget that it's fight, flight, or freeze, and it's the freezing people.
Yes.
It's the people who get stuck, the people who get paralyzed. We need to deal with. But I'm very happy to have ended on a note. We are once again just establishing our Nerd Adventure credentials. So happy for the Batman or Batman and Robin shout out. Guys, it was sorry.
Show. Can we have a whole show on late 60s, early 70s TV? The crap
Cartoons.
Which probably accounts for the fact, like, I can't remember my kids' names now. It's just like kind of calcified our brains.
Well, it would have to be
crap TV.
Yeah, it would have to be 2 shows. We'd have to do a show on cartoons, and then we'd have to do a show on, like, Bewitched and the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family and on and on.
I remember that Friday night lineup. It was Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, Room 222, The Odd Couple, and Love American Style. That was Friday night ABC.
Wow. I was this big.
Great television.
It was great television.
Way ahead of its time.
So I love that show so much. Twilight Zone, Star Trek, on and on.
Yes.
And on. Sanford and Sons. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're gonna do that. It'll be like a bonus episode or something, because you know what? Like, that's how we're gonna stay sane, by giving ourselves a break. I've been reading Henry James just to kind of help repair whatever brain cells I have left. So everybody, you need to have fun. You have to take your minds off of it to the extent that we can. Take our minds off what's going on. And as always, you guys help keep me grounded. I'm not going to say sane anymore, because I think that ship has sailed. But seriously, I look forward to this all week long. So Dean Obeidallah, Danielle Moodie, Brian Karem, Jen Tubin. Oh my God. It rhymes with, what is wrong with me? Jennifer Rubin.
Nobody's Tubin
right,
here.
Now I'm afraid to say Norm's name in case I screw that up.
My hands are up here.
Okay. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for everything you do and for being here. I will hopefully see you all next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for being here. That was so great. I hope that we are also helping keep you grounded and sane to the extent that that is possible. We will be back Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I have a great interview planned with Mehdi Hassan, who just published his book today. It's called How to Win Every Argument. Highly recommend it. Go get a copy now. And of course, we'll be back on Friday with the House of Horrors, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and back with Nerd Avengers next Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And you can find all of those shows at youtube.com/Politicon. While you're there, please subscribe to Politicon. Like the episode. You can comment on the episode if you didn't watch it live. You can click on that bell to subscribe, which simply ensures that you will be notified every time an episode drops. And, we are putting out shorts on Wednesdays and most Wednesdays, but also pretty much every Saturday. So check those out as well. It's just my way of keeping things a little lighter because, the onslaught of news is a little overwhelming sometimes. And we need to be able to laugh once in a while to the extent that that's possible. Oh, I always forget to mention this part. You can listen to every episode in podcast form at Apple or anywhere you get your podcasts. A 5-star review would be awesome, because it really, really, really does help promote the show and help people find the show. And I think that is it for us today. Thank you again so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. What a great group. And we will see you Thursday night. In the meantime, please stay safe and be kind.
Bye.